The sun has gone down at Hangman's Hill, and the ghost at Misery Corner isn't walking tonight. So, welcome to the Weird Tales Radio Show, your weekly fix of ghost stories, urban myths, witchcraft, magic, and folklore. And now, here's your host, writer, award-winning journalist, best-selling author, and sometime werewolf hunter, Charles Christian.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Weird Tales Radio Show. I'm Charles Christian and thank you very much for listening in again. This week we're all getting into the Christmas spirit with some Yuletide folklore and Christmas traditions, or should I say Christmas superstitions. And we've plenty of ghost stories. Actually, when I say we're all, I should exclude Janie, who's a bit of a Grinch, but I've twisted her arm. Okay, bribed her with chocolate to join in the merry throng. Anyway, before we go any further, let's start with Christmas with the Witches, because you know this show, we can't get enough stories about witchcraft. So, this one, it is from Serbia. And it's said, this is on the advice of somebody called, a gentleman I suspect, Mr. Thistleton Dyer. And he wrote this in 1882. And he says, if you take the trouble to make a small milking stool out of fir wood, then on Christmas Eve, look through the 3 holes that are for its legs that you put through into a church. So basically you have this large circle of wood with 3 holes in it, and you peer through into a church, and you will be rewarded by seeing a host of witches sitting with inverted milk pails, as in buckets, on their heads. Yes. Okay. Nothing suspicious about that. And here's another one, and it's saying that this is from North Germany. If a woman on Christmas Day boils green kale, that's like curly kale, sort of a brassica, cabbagey thing, then takes the ladle with which it was stirred and goes with it concealed beneath her apron to the church door, just as the priest is saying the Pater Noster, however it's pronounced. Yeah, a bit of tricky timing, that. She will ascertain who are the witches of the neighbourhood, because they will be wearing their extraordinary but otherwise invisible headdresses. Unfortunately, Mr. Thistleton Dyer doesn't tell you what these extraordinary but otherwise invisible headdresses are. Possibly like the Serbian witches, they are milk buckets. However, you should only do this for a moment, or else the person doing the peeking risks being threatened and persecuted by the devil. Not far from where we record these shows is a village called Skål, and in Skål is an old 17th century inn called the Skål Inn. And King Charles II stayed there and had breakfast, as did Admiral Nelson. Apparently stayed there on a number of occasions. The inn also had a famous, or probably infamous, but now long since vanished, round bed that could accommodate up to 30, presumably very sociable travellers at the same time. Anyway, not surprisingly, this inn has its fair share of ghost stories, and this involves a highwayman. And it dates back to the 1780s, when a highwayman called John Belcher apparently used the inn as his headquarters, and according to legend, when escaping the scene of the latest robbery, he would gallop into the inn, then ride up the long Jacobean staircase and along the top floor corridors before hiding himself and his horse in one of the bedrooms. You can still see a gate on the staircase that was supposedly erected to stop him riding up the staircase, and it said that if you lift the carpet, you can see the horse's hoof prints that the horse's shoes left on the oak stairs. History does not record what the chambermaids thought after cleaning up the bedroom after Belcher had stabled his horse there. It's also said that on certain nights of the year you can hear the ghostly sound of hooves clattering up the staircases. However, the inn's most famous ghost is that of Emma, the White Lady. In life, her husband accused her of having an affair with John Belcher, that's the highwayman, and despite her denials, or it would seem that Belcher had made passes at her, her husband refused to believe she was innocent of infidelity and murdered her. Oh, the beast! The ghost still walks the inn, and her white shade has been seen in one of the bedrooms, as well as on the staircase in one of the bars. And in case you want to stay there, and you either want to stay in the haunted room or avoid the haunted room, it's easy to spot. It's called Emma's Room. Now, as promised, some ghost stories or ghostly interludes talking about hauntings that you encounter over the December and the Christmas period. So the first one we have, not in any particular order, 19th of December, a recurring haunting, and it's at the Haworth Parsonage. That's the home of the Brontes up in Yorkshire. And it's said that on the 19th, you will see Emily Bronte haunting the grounds of the old parsonage where she used to live. Her head bowed as in deep thought and meditation. However, she will suddenly vanish if anyone comes too close. And the ghost may appear several days either side of the date. That's the 19th. The 20th, another recurring one. This is in Great Baddow in Essex at the White Horse Inn. And it was a site of a murder many years ago on the 20th of December and results in ghostly footsteps being heard coming down the attic stairs in the pub. And now here's Janie, who's got some folklore about Christmas decorations and stuff like that.
Yes, well, here's a bit of a shocker for the supermarkets and 9/10 of the population, I have to say, apart from us Grinches. Right, now apparently the earliest you should ever put up your Christmas decorations is, according to folklore, Christmas Eve. Could you believe that? And certainly you should not be putting up the mistletoe. That's probably one of the first things that goes up in certain establishments.
Exactly.
Where they sell liquor or have office parties.
Yes.
Yes, apparently.
Well, I mean, talking of office parties, everybody's gone by Christmas Eve.
That's true.
So they'd never have the decorations, would they?
No, they wouldn't.
No.
They never. No, mistletoe. Yeah. Anyway,
mistletoe.
Yes, you should not bring it inside before New Year's Eve. And they think that's possibly where some of the confusion has got in. Christmas Eve, New Year's Eve, same sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's got Eve in the world. Yeah. Anyway.
Middle of November.
Yeah.
Eve.
Yes. So, well, now, mistletoe is meant to protect houses from all sorts of nasty things. Evil, being quite nasty, spells, pretty nasty, lightning even, apparently. And it's got lots of association with the old religions. But
the Druids.
Oh, all right.
The
really?
Druids.
Yes, they had it, did they?
They were big on the mistletoe.
Did they do lots of kissing underneath it?
No, they tended to cut it and then cut people's throats.
Okie doke. So apparently, even the smallest little bit is usually banned from any church.
Ooh.
But there is an exclusion, and we don't know why, but you probably do. You know all these things. The exception is York Minster, I heard somewhere. I can't remember where I heard it. But anyway. Yeah. No, you have no answer for that.
I have no answer.
He's got no answer, everybody. It's amazing.
It's possibly because it was a Viking city.
Oh, that'll be it. Yeah. Good recovery there. So This custom of bringing evergreens into the house symbolised fertility and eternal life. And it actually was established, or was a thing, even before the Christmas tree was brought into the English court in 1800, around that time. Well, by Queen Charlotte, so exactly that time.
Yes.
Now, holly, obviously, you know, what's all that about? Nasty, prickly stuff.
Yeah.
That was very much revered as a protective plant and became representative of Jesus' crown of thorns, with the red berries denoting blood drops.
Oh, cheery.
Oh, yes, cheery thought. And bearing in mind it's a day that supposedly celebrates his birthday.
Yes.
It's a little bit chilly. And apparently, though, the holly of the smooth-leaved variety, if that's brought in the house, it means the woman of the house will rule the roost in the coming year. But if it's that spiky kind, the husband would get his way.
Oh, right.
So it's not even holly, but types of holly. Who thought that was so complicated? There's a little rhyme I have here, which really shows I haven't made all this up.
No.
Somewhere around the mid-18th century, 19th century.
Mid-19th century, yes.
Yeah. And it goes like this.
It's called, what's it called? Ceremony upon Candlemas Eve.
It is called that. You're reading my little note here, aren't you?
That's the heading of it.
That's the heading.
That's not part of the rhyme.
Now, when is Candlemas Eve?
Well, this is something for all the Grinches to groan at, because we have this thing about decorations should be taken down by Twelfth Night.
Twelfth Night, yes,
and
yes.
And then there's all this argument about whether Twelfth Night is on the 5th of January or the 6th of January, depending on when you start the first night of Christmas. Well, back in the olden days, not that long ago, to the early part of the 19th century, the Christmas tide, the season, ended on Candlemas, which is the 1st or 2nd thereabouts of February.
Oh, my God.
Yes. Of course.
So
should perhaps insist that shops now keep their decorations and their silly music playing until February.
No, can't do that because of Valentine's Day.
That's
You've
true.
got to get the merch in for that.
You
see?
have, yeah.
That's why that's been quietly dropped, I imagine. Anyway, this is the ceremony. It starts down with the rosemary, and so down with the bays and mistletoe. Down with the holly, ivy, all wherewith ye dressed the Christmas hall. That so the superstitious find, no one least branch there left behind. For look, how many leaves there be, neglected there, maids, trust to me, so many goblins you shall see. Oh, yes, because there's something to do with goblins.
Yes.
And leaving your Christmas decorations up.
Yes, it brings bad luck.
Yeah.
It brings little goblins into the house.
Yeah,
Clearly
I'd like to see the goblins. I think
that'd be fun.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
That's super cute.
I bet they are.
But folklore does say quite a lot about greenery and what you do with it. Yeah, afraid so. Folk, don't just shove it in the garden. It's not good. No. Yeah. You should also remember that you must leave the leaves up till Candlemas if you miss Twelfth Night, apparently. Every leaf remaining after this date will bring more goblins.
Ah.
Yeah. Even a death in the house during the year. They always say that because, I don't know, they just try to kind of, pimp it up a bit, don't they, really?
They did a lot of dying in the olden days.
Well, I suppose they did, that's why. Anyway.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And I mean,
Then...
that'd be an interesting prospect for people who've got centrally heated houses and Christmas trees. All the pine needles that would be down there if you left it till February.
Till February, yes. And then you can't do anything with them
because, of course, you have no servants now.
No. Darn it. How I miss them. Anyway, yes, so the remaining leaves apparently should be burnt on Candlemas Eve, which, as you pointed out, is February the 1st.
Something. Yes.
Yeah. Unless you live in Shrewsbury, where it's considered very unlucky to burn them, apparently. Again, I heard that somewhere or read that somewhere.
Yes.
I know no more about it.
Yes, I've got another one here as well, is there's an old superstition that it's unlucky to cut branches of yew and bring them into your house as part of your Christmas decorations.
Well, I could understand that because it's caused highly poisonous.
Well, they are very toxic. Yes, it said if you do, there will be a death in the house within a year, though quite likely if somebody eats the wrong stuff, there'll be a death within a few weeks. So it's one of those bits of oldie folklore that's actually quite a sensible...
Well, they don't say a person. It could be a rat ate it or the cat or the dog ate it. So it might be quite logical. It's just not a person. I'm going with that thought.
I don't think in the olden days they would have cared about a rat eating something and dying. That would be a good thing.
True. Yeah.
Anyway, yes, I mean, that's a sort of health and safety type warning one. I mean, we ought to have more modern folklore covering things like that, you know.
Like what?
Don't put a cup with metallic rims in your microwave, lest there be fire and brimstone.
And a death in the family. Yes, we know. Anyway, apparently there's folklore about gifts as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Apparently, I didn't know this, you must never give shoes to your loved ones on Christmas or for Christmas. You know. Because if you do, that person may walk out of your life by dying, according to most accounts. Come on, cheer up, you lot. Anyway, sorry to be like this towards Christmas. I'm not really a Grinch.
Oh, yes, she is.
Apparently, if you're related to the sort of reckless people who get people shoes for Christmas, on no account wear them on Christmas Day.
So there'll be a death in the family.
Well, bad luck.
Bad luck
will be brought to you. I do know that one about never putting shoes on the table. And I must admit, I do kind of adhere to that.
Well, that's another one that's quite sensible, because in the olden days, your shoes would probably be clarted on the bottom with...
yes. Quite a lot of poo.
Poo and Black Death and stuff
like
that.
Yes.
So what is it with all these people who get given slippers for Christmas?
That doesn't count.
Oh, right.
Apparently. It's soft, cosy, fluffy slippers are not the same as your great big... whatever they wore in those days. I don't know.
Hobnail boots.
What are they called? They were called... they were like wooden shoes, weren't they? Clogs. That's right, yeah. I'm afraid, that's all I have to say about that.
You're not a fan, are you?
No, I'm trying to be enthusiastic. But...
I mean, we're talking of the decorations. I mean, nowadays, they're all shop bought.
Yeah,
but you and I are of a vintage that remember the olden days.
We made them ourselves, didn't we? Oh, how lame was that? But it's so exciting, you know. You used to buy a packet. They were kind of ready-made. You could probably make themselves paper chains. Gummy one end, which you had to lick. You know, so God knows what was that, dead horse hooves. And then you just sort of sat there for hours and hours, putting these paper chains together, which you then hung up.
Where they
for some reason
collected dust.
Then you threw them all away because, of course, they didn't last.
No. And did anyone in your household do that thing with a newspaper, you know, where you fold it all up and then you tear out a shape and it goes all the way through the newspaper? So you won't
yes, we did it. That was our Christmas present.
Bit of newspaper with an orange in it.
Yes, yeah. Sometimes a pipe cleaner if we were really rich.
To make pipe cleaner people.
Pipe cleaner people, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Don't see many of them in the shops these days, do you?
No, nor pipes.
Pipe cleaner on the elf on the shelf, yes.
Yeah. But don't let's go into that, or we're probably going to a full Monty Python skit about eating a piece of coal out of a puddle for a Christmas dinner.
I didn't know you grew up in Yorkshire like me.
Sorry, actually.
Thank you, Janie.
Bye.
Here's our Another ghost story, bit of an odd one. Supposedly on the 21st of December, which is obviously usually the winter solstice, and it's at a place called Bishop's Castle in Shropshire, and it is at the Stiper Stones. And the legend says that once a year all the ghosts in England meet at these stones, presumably for some kind of paranormal AGM. Here's another ghost story for you, and this is at Lower Boscastle in Cornwall. And it's at a place called the Pendine Vow, or sometimes called the Pendine Fugu. And it takes place on the winter solstice, and it's a figure of a woman in white holding a rose in her mouth, and turns and walks into the distance. Some say to see her will bring misfortune, and anyone foolish enough to follow her will never be seen again. Well, supposedly nobody ever has done that, but we don't know whether they have done it and never been seen again. And still on Christmas Eve ghosts, at Brough in Derbyshire at the Travellers' Rest pub on the 24th of December. The pub is haunted by a local farm girl who died after falling down the stairs trying to escape from a drunken labourer on Christmas Eve. Still on the subject of ghosts local to the studios here, we've mentioned the ghost at the inn in Scole, but a little bit further on from the Scole Inn, on the A143 heading east, as in coming near to our studios in fact, you'll see signs for Thorpe Abbots. What interests us here is not the village, but the site of the old World War II US Air Force base. It was the home of the 100th Bombardment Heavy Group, part of the US 8th Air Force, which flew B-17 Flying Fortresses on bombing raids across Nazi Germany and occupied Europe from 1943. In case you're wondering why it was round here, well, it's in East Anglia, which is relatively flat, thinly populated agricultural area, and it's the bit of England that bulges out into the North Sea, making it a perfect location in which to build airfields that were the shortest distance flying-wise from continental Europe. At its height, I think it's also worth pointing out that because it was a long way from large centres of population, it was also a safe place to store bombs and munitions. At its height, there were 37 major airfields and at least 40 subsidiary emergency and decoy fields, and around 200,000 US 8th Air Force personnel stationed here, which earned it the reputation of being the fields of Little America. Now, the 100th Bombardment Group earned the unfortunate nickname of the Bloody 100th for their higher than average number of casualties it sustained. On some raids, over a dozen planes were lost, and each B-17 had a crew of 10. And on one infamous raid over Munster in October 1943, just one plane, called Rose's Riveters, returned safely to Thorpe Abbots. In all, the Bloody 100th lost 177 planes in the course of flying 306 missions. With the end of the war, Thorpe Abbots was returned to the RAF, and after several years of inactivity, the base was closed in 1956, turned over to agricultural use. Then in 1977, the control tower and several other buildings, including a couple of Nissan huts, or Quonsets as the Americans call them, were leased to a group of volunteers who set about restoring the buildings and creating what is now the 100th Bomb Group Memorial Museum. Did I mention the control tower is haunted? From time to time, visitors of the museum report an overpowering presence within the control tower, occasionally accompanied by the brief glimpse of an airman dressed in full flying gear. The sound of VHF radio chatter and the noise of aircraft have also been heard. Now, interestingly, this is not a new phenomenon, as Eddie the Ghost, as American personnel called him, first began appearing during early 1944, when he was reported as walking through walls of the airmen's quarters. Stories of the ghost persisted. Eddie was thought to be one of the pilots who died during Black Week in October 1943, when the group was almost wiped out, with some men so frightened by the ghost they were taking pistols and rifles to bed with them. Fearing an accident, Colonel Thomas Jeffrey, known as Colonel Jeff, the base commander at the time, allegedly banned all talk of Eddie on penalty of court-martial. Today, sightings are less frequent, although Eddie still occasionally is seen when the tower is locked up for the night. It is said he appears at a first-floor window, looking out as if to say good night. On a personal note, when I visited the airfield a couple of years ago to talk to the museum volunteers, they all noticeably changed the subject whenever I mentioned Eddie the Ghost. Perhaps they were still following Colonel Jeff's orders. Although the Americans, with the exception of Eddie the Ghost, left Thorpe Abbots in 1946, the Bloody Hundredth are still in East Anglia, now serving as the 100th Air Refuelling Wing out of Mildenhall, and the 1949 Oscar-winning movie 12 O'Clock High, starring Gregory Peck, is based in part on missions flown by the 100th.
You're listening to the Weird Tales radio show with Charles Christian.
Here's another winter ghost, and it's the 24th of December, that's Christmas Eve, and it's at High Laver in Essex on the main road through the village. And the ghost is known as Abigail in her carriage. And it's a lady by the name of Abigail Marsham, or a ghost of a lady called Abigail Marsham, who spent her remaining years in the village. Her residence, her home, is now demolished, but she passes through the village in a carriage once a year to have a quick sad look at where her house once stood. Ah. Now, this is a ghost story, ghostly sound, that crops up all over the country. The sound of silver bells ringing out their sound of Christmas, located in the ruins of a former abbey. And this particular one is in Evesham, which is in Hereford and Worcester, and apparently hidden in the river when the local abbey was closed by Henry VIII's men in 1539, are the silver bells that the abbey used to have, and they still sound on Christmas Eve. However, before you head off to start draining the water there, it's worth noting that they didn't make church bells of silver. They're not hard enough. Little tinkly wristlets and ornamental bells, yes, for people. Church bells, no. There are no silver bells or gold bells. Here's another of our Christmas ghosts, and it's the UK's most popular ghost, Anne Boleyn. And she apparently appears on Christmas Eve at Hever in Kent on the bridge over the river there, which is called the Eden. And her ghost crosses the bridge once a year. That's it. Just a ghost. And as far as I know, not carrying her head underneath her arm. Now here's another little bit of folklore from the Waveney Valley, the weird Waveney Valley where I live and where the studio is located. And this relates to the town of Diss, that's D-I-S-S. And there's a town sign there. Now, on one side of the town sign, it's elaborately carved and painted, is a 16th century poet called John Skelton, who taught Henry VIII when he was a young prince. That's fine. Understand that. John Skelton lived in the area and was the vicar of Diss for many years. The other side shows a lady in a long pink gown wearing a tall conical headdress. Technically these are called hennins, and standing next to her is a distinguished looking bearded cove in a black medieval outfit, and he's offering the woman what appears to be a boiled egg in an egg cup. Yeah. The plaque on the sign's base explains the image shows Matilda, the daughter of Sir Robert Fitzwalter, who was one of the lords of the manor, and Matilda made the mistake of rejecting the advances of King John, the king at the time, and as a consequence, an angry king sent a messenger bearing the gift of a poisoned potched egg, of which she died in the year 1213. A potched egg is another name for a boiled egg rather than a poached egg. That's an intriguing tale, and over the years it's been muddled up with other stories and become something of an urban myth. So let's have a look at the facts of it. Well, Sir Robert Fitzwalter did have a daughter called Matilda, and in the year 1212 he claimed, this is Robert Fitzwalter, that King John did indeed attempt to seduce her. King John, it should be noticed, was a notorious womanizer, and several other barons had made similar allegations against him. We know Sir Robert, also called Robert the Valiant, was one of the barons challenging King John's power and was one of the signatories of the Magna Carta and involved in a civil war against John a couple of years later. Sir Robert ultimately made peace with the crown, went on a crusade and eventually died in his bed in the year 1235, by which time he was regarded as a champion of English liberty and renowned for his martial deeds. Now, over time, Sir Robert and his daughter Matilda became caught up in the legend of Robin Hood, so that by the early 1600s, so you're looking some 400 years after the events, a snappily entitled The Downfall of Robert, Earl of Huntingdon, afterwards called Robin Hood, and his love for the chaste Matilda, Lord Fitzwalter's daughter, afterwards called Maid Marian, appeared, and it depicts Matilda fleeing from King John's lustful advances, escaping to Sherwood Forest, changing her name to Marian, as you do, and eventually becoming Robin Hood's companion. There's a similar story called King John and Matilda, came out a few years later, has a similar plot. Now, in both the plays, she is ultimately murdered, a martyr to virtue, by the agents of King John. In one, she falls prey to a poison glove, i.e. you put it on your hand and the poison gets you, while in the other it is a bracelet whose poison had eaten its way to her bone and the fiery poison had dried away her life blood. Talking of poisons, King John, according to legend, died as a result of eating poisoned ale, or eating poisoned plums, or eating too many peaches. Anyway, where does this leave us with the tale of Matilda Fitzwalter of Diss? I know, we're all scratching our head. Well, in the 1628 play, this is the later play about Robin and Matilda, there's a minor character called Lady Bruce, who was one of the wives of one of the barons opposing King John. And she and her son George are shown in the play being imprisoned by the king's men and left to starve to death in the dungeon. Now, this is intriguing because it's where historical fiction actually starts to overlap with historical fact. Because there was another Matilda in King John's circle. She was Matilda, sometimes called Maud, the names were used interchangeably in that era, also known as the Lady of Hay, as in Hay-on-Wye. And she was married to William de Braose, a powerful baron. And for about 10 years, this William de Braose was a favourite of King John. Unfortunately, in 1208, William quarrelled with John. One suggestion is that it was over a huge sum of money that William owed the king. The value of the money would have been around 2 million UK pounds, or whatever the equivalent these days is, over 2 million a quarter US dollars in modern values. Another suggestion is that Matilda, that's the Baron's wife, made indiscreet comments regarding the murder of King John's nephew, Arthur, the Duke of Brittany. Whatever the reason, John demanded Matilda's son William be sent to him as a hostage for her husband's loyalty. Matilda refused, stating she would not deliver her children to a king who had murdered his own nephew. For those of you who don't know the story, King John is reputed, and probably historically actually did, murder his nephew, Prince Arthur of Brittany, who was a rival for the throne. Whatever the reason, John acted ruthlessly, leading troops to seize de Brosse's castles, and in 1210 he captured both Matilda and her son William. Now, Matilda's husband, the former royal favourite, was declared an outlaw and escaped to France disguised as a beggar, but died the following year. As for Matilda and her son, they were first imprisoned at Windsor Castle, but later transferred to Corfe Castle in Dorset and placed inside a dungeon, and then forgotten about, just left to starve to death. According to one report, the boy died first, and his body was found to be covered in bite marks, and the flesh had been chewed where his starving mother had, in her desperation, been forced to eat her own child. The reality is rats probably chewed both of them up. King John, then, was definitely, as the old history books would say it, not just a bad king, but a very bad king. As for Matilda Fitzwalter of Diss, she may have been propositioned by King John, but at least she was not poisoned by him. There again, disappointingly for the romantics among us, neither did she run away to the greenwood to become Robin Hood's girlfriend. Here's another Christmastide ghost, and it's one in Kent, and it's at Marden on the road to Hawkhurst. And it's apparently a character called Gilbert, who was an 18th century highwayman who tried to rob a coach. However, he was stabbed to death by one of the occupants, a woman, after she recognised him as being the man who had killed her brother. The killing drove the woman mad, and the scene is said to be silently reenacted every Christmas Eve. Now up to Preston in Lancashire for another of our Christmas Eve hauntings, and it's more ringing bells. We've had them already, and this is at Preston and the site of an old monastery which is nowadays thought to be on the A59 to Friargate Road, or Friargate area of Preston. And local legend says a church once stood there but sank into the earth, but its bells can still be heard ringing on Christmas Eve. On a rather grimmer Christmas ghost story tale, at Stonyhurst in Lancashire on the Cromwell Bridge, apparently Christmas Eve is where the devil crosses the bridge once a year. And if he looks you in the eye, he'll take your soul. So don't let old nick your soul. Over in the eastern counties now at Bradley in Lincolnshire, and where the location is the Bradley Woods. It's another recurring manifestation on Christmas Eve, and some people say it's a phantom nun, others that it was a woodman's wife. Either way, it's a woman dressed in black, and she will appear if you call out, Black lady, I've stolen your baby." Which frankly seems rather unfair and cruel, and if you get chased by a ghost for saying that, really you've nothing much more to, no one else to blame but yourself. Staying in Lincolnshire at Brigg, There's a haunting manifestation of an old lady who left her house one Christmas Eve to beg for money to buy her Christmas lunch, but became lost in the snow and fog and froze to death. Her ghost apparently is still sometimes seen asking for directions home. Bit of a sad one. We've discussed pantos before on this show. For those of you in America, it's a very confusing experience because the principal boy, the hero, is actually played by a woman, and quite obviously a woman. And at the end, she marries the heroine, who is played by a woman. All very good and clean and family wholesome entertainment. And the principal boy's mother, the dame, is played by a man, and quite clearly, obviously, a man as well. And I say, we regard this as good, wholesome, children-friendly entertainment. But about those pantos, what's always intrigued me are the origins of them. And here's one that actually has a relevance for those of us who live in Norfolk, and indeed the tale is set location about from 20 miles away from where we are located. So here we go. The Babes in the Wood. This is a cheery tale about two young children left to die in a forest before being buried in a pile of leaves by Robin Redbreast and his woodland friends. The first version of this story was circulated by a person called Thomas Millington of Norwich in 1595, and it had the not exactly snappily title of The Norfolk Gent, His Will and Testament, and How He Committed the Keeping of His Children to His Own Brother, Who Dealt Most Wickedly with Them, and How God Plagued Him for It. This is usually known as The Children in the Wood or the Norfolk Tragedy. It tells of two young children, the Babes, a boy and a girl, who were left in the care of their uncle after their parents' premature death. The terms of the will were the family fortune would pass to the children unless they died before reaching adulthood, the age of majority, in which case the uncle would inherit the lot. I think you're with me here on what's going to happen next, and you'll not be surprised to learn that Uncle was unwilling to leave this arrangement entirely to fate and hired a couple of thugs to ensure the children disappeared. The pretext was the children were being taken to London to be educated. However, the thugs, hired to deal with them, either abandoned the children without food and water in the depths of a forest, or else they quarrelled over the best way to dispose of the children, and while fighting among themselves, the two children fled into the forest and became irreparably lost. In due course, the children died of hunger and exposure, whereupon the birds covered them in leaves. This might seem a little bit of a prissy addition to the story, but by the standards of the 16th century, it was important for people to receive a proper burial rather than being just left to rot out in the open. Being a morality story, the story went on to describe the divine retribution that befell the wicked uncle. These included his barns burning down, his crops failing, his cattle dying, and his own children drowning on a sea journey to Portugal before the uncle himself was declared bankrupt and died in the debtor's prison. It's a grim story, but Millington's tale continued to circulate over the next couple of centuries and was adapted for the stage in 1793. Then in 1827, it was adapted into the first version of a pantomime. However, curiously, for the first few years of it being performed as a panto, the story still retained its tragic ending, lightened only by the fact the spirits of the children were reunited with their parents in heaven. Oh, look, kiddies, we're going to take you to see a show where the two little kids die and their ghosts meet their parents in heaven. That's a happy ending. However, in 1867, the panto version was given a drastic rewrite, and the second half of the show, opening with the Babes, traditionally called Dot and Trot, being rescued from their fate by none other than Robin Hood and his merry men, complete with Maid Marian, who became their godmother. This is broadly the version still performed today, with the wicked uncle sometimes depicted as the sheriff of Nottingham, and the whole show climaxing with the defeat of the uncle or the sheriff, and the children being restored to their rightful inheritance. So far so good, but where did Millington draw his original inspiration in 1595? The most likely suggestion is that it is based upon a true event which took place at Griston Hall near Wotton, about 20 miles from Norwich, some 30 years earlier. A certain Thomas de Grey died, leaving his home Griston Hall and its estates and all its revenues to his 7-year-old son Thomas Jr. Because he was so young, the boy was made a ward of court, and a marriage was arranged to another child, Elizabeth Drury. Such arrangements were not unusual in Elizabethan England, but were primarily to protect property interests and had nothing to do with romance, i.e. the kids didn't get a look in. It was an arranged marriage. However, it was also part of this will that should Thomas die, this is young Thomas, die before reaching majority, adulthood, the inheritance would pass to his uncle, Robert de Grey. 4 years later, the uncle sent Thomas away to visit his stepmother, that's his late father's second wife. But there, while en route, Thomas mysteriously died and Robert inherited the estate. Soon there were rumours Thomas had been murdered on the uncle's orders while travelling through the nearby Wayland Wood. Robert didn't help his cause by attempting to seize the dower funds, the money provided for a bride should the husband die before her, promised to Elizabeth Drury. The Drury family fought back, and for the rest of his life, Robert de Grey, that is the wicked uncle, faced legal problems. He was later fined and imprisoned in Norwich for recussancy. This is failing to attend Anglican church services, which was a bit of a thing in the England in the late 16th and early 17th centuries, and is said to have died disgraced and bankrupt. In a further similarity to Millington's original tale, Robert's own sons never returned from a military expedition to Portugal. It's even suggested the story about the robins burying the children may have been an allusion to a Robert robbing, see what they did there, his nephew, and covering up the evidence. Whatever the truth, this part of Norfolk is now firmly Babes in the Wood territory. There used to be an old oak tree in Wayland Wood, until it was destroyed by lightning in the late 19th century, was a tourist attraction because it was reputed to be where the babes sheltered on the night they died. Should just point out that there was only one babe, just young Thomas, who died. And you could even buy souvenir postcards of Griston Hall, which clearly identified the wicked uncle's house. And even today, the village of Griston and the town of Wotton feature the babes on their civic signs. Sadly, the spookiest legend that Wayland Wood derives its name from the Wailing Wood, because it is haunted by the ghostly sound of children sobbing, is without foundation. For as long ago as the Doomsday Book in 1086, these woodlands were called Wain Lone, and that became Wailing Wood. So there, the true story of the Babes in the Wood. Now, this is always one of these ghost stories that's always fascinated me. Headless horsemen and headless coach drivers. I mean, isn't that just dangerous? Sanford-on-Thames, which is in Oxfordshire, in the fields around the village. On Christmas Eve, a coach and 4 horses, that is, driven by a headless horseman, gallops at great speed around the fields near the village just before Christmas Day. Here's another Christmas ghost story, and it's another lost bell variation on, and this is in Shrewsbury in Shropshire at the Bowmere Pool. And it's said that a village once stood here, but the villagers never went to church and mocked God. So he sent forth a storm that flooded the area, and the church bells can now be heard ringing once a year beneath the waters. Another story says the pool is the home to a massive fish. It was caught only once but escaped, taking the sword of the fisherman or knight who was fishing for him with him. And this fish now uses the sword to cut any nets which fall near him. Here's a local one. I think we've mentioned it before. And it's at Barsham in Suffolk. And it is the ghost of old Blunderhazard, who was a member of the Blennerhassett family. And once a year, just before Christmas, old Blunderhazard leaves the village in a coach pulled by headless horses. The phantom travels to Hassett's Tower in Norwich, which used to be the family's Norwich home, before returning home before sunrise. Yeah, I've always been fascinated by quite how headless horses and headless coachmen work. Okay, here's another of our winter ghosts. And this one takes place during December at Thornton Heath at the Lion Inn in Pawson's Road. And apparently, and it's quite a recent one, there's said to be a poltergeist in the pub in the older parts, which leads to a toast-like smell and also a few other noises being heard. So the ghostly toast maker of Old Thornton Heath. Now here's a bit of an oddity. We had a request recently. Could we advise on what length a witch's wand should be? And this would obviously work for witches, wizards and anybody else practicing the magical arts. Now the person contacting me said that the only advice they'd seen was by a wand maker called Mr. Garrick Ollivander. And he writes that most wands will be in the range of between 9 and 14 inches long, although I have sold extremely short ones, 8 inches and under, and very long ones, 15 inches and over, although these are exceptionally rare, and in the latter case a physical peculiarity demanded an excessive wand length. Now, there is just one problem with this, is that Mr. Garrick Ollivander doesn't actually exist. He's a fictional character, and he was invented by the author J.K. Rowling, and indeed she wrote the words about that. So what other guidance can we find? Well, I've been doing a little trawl around my various books, and I've found one reference that says wands can be any length under 12 inches or so. And indeed, if you look at the tarot cards, particularly the Waite-Smith tarot card, the magician there, and indeed look at some of the witch wands that are available in Wiccan and witchcraft shops, you'll find that they're actually quite short, 12 inches or so. Another explanation is that the wands vary in length according to the size of the user's arm. And I'm quoting here, "This is because a wand is used for pointing and directing, and it's intended as an extension of the arm or pointed finger. Thus, some traditionalists believe a personalised wand should measure from the crook of the elbow to the tip of the middle finger, and then just an inch or two beyond, which means in practice they will range from about a foot to 18 inches long. However, another source says that they should be a cubit long, and a cubit is an ancient unit of length. And definitions do vary, but it's typically taken from the length from the elbow along the forearm length to the tip of the middle finger. And that will typically be somewhere in the region of a full-grown adult of about 17.5 to 18 inches. So, really, it's down to you. But, obviously, it's worth bearing in mind that if you are using it for inscribing casting a circle on the ground, scoring the earth, you do actually want it relatively long, so it is a useful extension of your arm. Though, witches' wands, basically, go wherever feels right for you. And that's it. Almost out of time. But before we go, we spare a thought for Saint Eligius, better known as St. Loy. Now, 1st of December is St. Eligius' Day, or St. Loy's Day. The saint was a historical character, a powerful figure in 7th century France, acting as advisors to kings, and he was a bishop, and he founded monasteries, and he was responsible for ordering the building of churches. He was famed for his piety, his miracles, and for being a skilled metal worker. His most famous exploit occurred while he was shoeing a difficult horse, and when he is said to have actually removed the leg, applied the shoe, and then reattached the leg to the horse. I think actually, having seen horses being shod, a lot of farriers would probably still like that as a way of doing things. He's also said, same way as St. Dunstan, to have taken the devil by the nose with his red-hot blacksmith's tongs when the devil was trying to tempt him. He was quickly taken up as the patron saint of metal workers in continental Europe, lasting until the late medieval times at least. Despite being widely popular in medieval England, very few churches were named after him, and his fame has fallen so completely that by the 19th century, blacksmiths were claiming that St. Clement, or Old Clem, was their patron saint. So, 1st of December, time to remember a forgotten saint. Sad. Anyway, just remains for me to say thank you for listening, and I'll hope you'll join me again same time next week. Till then, this is Charles Christian saying, stay well, stay different. Good night.
Black Shuck, the demon dog of East Anglia, is baying at the moon, which means it's time for us to go. You've been listening to the Weird Tales radio show with Charles Christian, your weekly fix of ghost stories, urban myths, witchcraft, magic and folklore. You can keep in touch with us online at www.weirdtalesradio.com, by email to weirdtales@icloud.com, and on Twitter @ChristianUncut. Join us again next week for another edition of the Weird Tales radio show. Good night.